If the thought of divorce no longer scares you, and instead feels like relief, it doesn't mean you're ready to leave. It means you are very tired. And before you take a step that cannot be undone, there is one thing you need to understand. This video is not meant to convince you to stay. And it's not meant to tell you to endure. It's meant to help you not make a decision out of pain that you may have to live with for years. You didn't wake up one day suddenly thinking about divorce. That thought didn't appear out of nowhere. It built up slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. First there was exhaustion, then disappointment, then the feeling that you were carrying everything on your own, while the person next to you felt absent. And at some point the idea of leaving stops being frightening, starts to feel like a way out, like relief, like the place where you can finally stop trying. And this is where it's important to pause. Not because divorce is always a mistake, and not because you're obligated to endure, but because decisions made in a state of deep exhaustion are almost never accurate. When you're depleted, your mind isn't looking for the right path. It's looking for relief from pain. And very often divorce looks like that relief. But let's be honest. If you're here right now, it's not only about the marriage. It's about the fact that you've lived without support for a long time. You tried to talk. You explained. You waited for change. You adapted, smoothed things over, took on more than you could handle. And little by little, a feeling formed inside you. No one hears me. No one chooses me. No one holds me. This doesn't destroy you all at once. It destroys you drop by drop. And at some point, you don't even feel anger anymore. You feel emptiness. And this is where many people make their first dangerous mistake. They try to make a final decision from inside that emptiness. But emptiness is a terrible advisor. Because right now, you're not at a point of choice. You're at a point of survival. Divorce is not a start over button. It's a deep, irreversible transition. And if you enter it without clarity, you may carry the same pain with you, just into a different life. There's one important thing to understand. If you're constantly thinking about divorce, it doesn't necessarily mean you want to leave. Very often it means you want the pain to stop. You want to finally be seen, heard. You want people to stop demanding more from you than you can give. And if you're at this stage right now, your task is not to decide stay or go. Your task is to pause and rebuild your inner support. While you're exhausted, while you're living on autopilot, while you're making decisions from fatigue, any choice will be distorted. This isn't about weakness. It's about honesty. You don't have to decide everything right now. You don't have to put a final period on it today. You don't have to be certain. But you do owe it to yourself not to break your life from a state where you simply have nothing left. In the next parts, we'll talk about why the thought of divorce has become so persistent right now, what is really destroying you inside the marriage, and how to tell the difference between a time to recover and a time when it truly is time to leave. But for now, remember this most important thing. If you're on the edge, it's not a signal to run. It's a signal to stop. At some point, the thought of divorce stops being scary. It no longer sounds like a catastrophe. It sounds like a pause, like silence, like a chance to finally breathe. And that's the least frightening part. What's more frightening is something else. That you no longer have the strength to explain, to wait, to hope. That the conversations go in circles. That you catch yourself thinking more and more often, what if nothing ever changes? And this is exactly where many women start to believe the problem is the marriage itself. The man. A wrong choice. That, I just don't love him anymore. But let's stop here and look deeper. Most often, the desire for divorce doesn't appear when everything is completely broken. It appears when a woman has lived without response for too long. When you speak, and you're listened to but not truly heard. When you ask and you're promised things that never happen. When you share, and it disappears into silence. Over time, a strange feeling forms inside. You're still in a relationship, but emotionally you're already alone. And in that moment, divorce starts to feel logical. Not as the end of love, but as an exit from loneliness. But here's what's important to understand. Loneliness inside a marriage is not always a signal to leave. Often, it's a signal that you've been carrying everything on your own for too long. Emotionally, mentally, sometimes your entire life. You got used to being strong, to deciding, to smoothing things over. to not escalating. You learn not to ask for too much, not to expect, not to hope. And gradually a feeling formed inside that if you leave, you'll feel lighter not because you're free, but because you'll finally stop being invisible. And this is the key moment. Divorce in this state is not a choice. It's an escape from exhaustion. But escape doesn't heal the source of pain. It only changes the scenery. Right now, it's very important to ask yourself an honest question. Not do I love him? And not is this marriage worth saving? But a different question. When was the last time I felt cared for? If the answer is, I don't remember, it doesn't mean the marriage is dead. It means you've been living without emotional support for a long time. And while that's true, every decision will feel extreme. You don't have to know right now whether you're leaving or staying. But you do have to stop making these decisions alone inside your own head. Because an exhausted person almost always chooses rupture, not restoration. Not because restoration is impossible, but because there's simply no strength left for it. In the second part, the goal isn't to make a decision. It's to see the state you're in when you're making decisions. If you're depleted, the first step is to get your footing back. Clarity, calm, support. Only after that does it become clear what is really happening in the relationship and whether there is still life there. In the next part, we'll talk about what actually destroys a marriage long before the words, I want a divorce, and why so many couples reach this point without even understanding how. Most marriages don't fall apart because of one single event. Not because of infidelity, not because of one painful conversation, and not even because of divorce itself. They fall apart long before that. At the moment when living connection between two people disappears. It happens quietly. No one slams doors. No one screams. At some point, you simply stop feeling that there's a person next to you, whom you can lean on. First, it's small things. You talk, he gets distracted. You share, he changes the subject. You wait for a response and don't get one. Not because he's bad, but because he's not emotionally present. And you start doing what you know best. Adapting. You speak more gently. You ask less often. You expect less. You take on more. You don't want conflict. You don't want to seem difficult. You just want to preserve what you have. But this is exactly where the destruction begins. Because relationships where one person is constantly adapting stop being a relationship between two adults. They turn into a survival system. You stop being yourself. You become convenient. And over time a feeling appears inside. That it's as if you've been erased. You're there. You're doing everything right. But you're no longer felt. And here comes the key mistake almost everyone makes. You think the problem is a lack of love, cooling feelings, that the spark is gone. But in reality, the problem is deeper. The problem is that you lived for a long time without response, without emotional feedback, without the sense that your words matter. Love doesn't disappear instantly. It shuts down when a person stops feeling significant. And if you catch yourself thinking that you no longer care, that you're not even angry anymore, that you're just tired, this is not indifference. It's protective shutdown. That's how the psyche protects itself. When it goes too long without confirmation of its value. And this is where honesty with yourself matters. You didn't fall out of love. You became exhausted. You didn't stop wanting this relationship. You stopped wanting to be alone inside it. And until this is recognized, any talk about divorce will revolve around symptoms, not the cause. Because if you leave now, without understanding this state, you'll carry it with you into new relationships, into a new life, into new decisions, and you may end up again in the same place, giving a lot and receiving very little. This part is not about blame, and not about finding someone at fault. It's about understanding what exactly was destroying you inside this relationship. Until you see this clearly, you won't be able to make an honest decision, neither to leave nor to rebuild. In the next part, we'll talk about the most dangerous mistake women make right before divorce, and why it later causes the most pain. There is one mistake women make most often before divorce. It doesn't look like weakness. On the contrary, it looks like strength, determination, and clarity. But it's the one that hurts the most afterward. That mistake is making a final decision without reconnecting with yourself. When you live for a long time in a relationship where you're not heard, where you explain, wait, adapt, where your feelings are constantly postponed for later, one thing slowly happens inside you. You stop feeling. Not suddenly, not dramatically, slowly, almost imperceptibly. First you react less. Then you talk about important things less often. Then you stop expecting a response. And eventually you catch yourself thinking that you almost don't care anymore. And this is where many women conclude, so there's no love anymore. That means it's time to leave. But that's not always true. Very often this isn't the end of feelings. It's emotional numbness, a protective mechanism of the psyche. When it hurts for too long, when there's no response for too long, when you've been alone in the relationship for too long, the psyche simply shuts down sensitivity, so you can keep living. And this state is easy to confuse with clarity. You're calm. You're not crying. You're not doubting. You may even feel relief at the thought of divorce. But that's not because the decision is mature. It's because you're tired of feeling. And this is where the real danger lies. Decisions made from numbness almost never lead to life. They lead to silence, to the absence of pain, but not to fullness. A divorce made in this state often doesn't bring the relief you expect. It simply moves the emptiness into a different space. You leave not because you want a new life, but because you can no longer live in the old one. And those are very different motivations. When a decision is made from exhaustion, you don't choose what's right for you. You choose what you want to escape from. And later, when your strength gradually returns, a heavy realization may come. I didn't go where I wanted to go. I was just running. This doesn't mean divorce is a mistake. It means timing matters. A divorce made from clarity and a divorce made from burnout are two completely different experiences. In the first, you feel grounded, even if it hurts. In the second, you feel empty, even if things have become quieter. That's why a different question matters far more right now. Not should I stay or should I leave, but this one. What state am I in when I'm making this decision? If inside there is chronic exhaustion, the feeling that you're carrying everything alone, the sense that you haven't been chosen in a long time, emotional emptiness, the desire for everything to just end, this is not a point of choice. It's a point where you need to stop. Stop not the relationship. Stop automatic decisions. You don't have to know right now what to do with this marriage, but you do have to admit that you're too depleted right now to make irreversible decisions. This isn't about weakness. It's about responsibility toward yourself. A pause is not a step backward. It's a step sideways so you can finally see the whole picture. Until you reconnect with yourself. Until sensitivity returns. Until you feel inner support again. Any choice will be extreme. In the next part, we'll talk about how to tell the difference between relationships where there is still life and relationships that are truly finished. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from calm adult clarity. When a woman reaches the thought of divorce, she almost always asks herself the same question, even if she never says it out loud. Is there anything alive here at all? Not love, not passion, not promises, but life. Because a relationship can look fine from the outside and be completely empty on the inside. And here it's important not to deceive yourself in either direction. Some women leave too early because it hurts, because it's heavy, because it's lonely. Others stay too long because it's scary, familiar, because what if there's nothing else? But there are signs that help you understand whether there is any real potential for recovery in this relationship. And they're not about words, not about promises, not even about how you feel right now. The first sign is the ability to stay in contact. Not perfect contact, not pretty or polished. Real contact. Can he stay present in a conversation when you're struggling? Or does he always escape into his phone, defensiveness, or silence? What matters is not whether he agrees with you. What matters is whether he stays connected. When the conversation becomes uncomfortable, if every serious conversation ends with you feeling guilty, difficult, or too emotional, that's not conflict. That's a rupture of contact. The second sign is the willingness to see your reality, not to justify himself, not to explain why it's not that bad, but to acknowledge, Yes, this is hard for you. I see that. If your pain is constantly minimized, called drama, or reframed as you wanting too much, this isn't a lack of love. It's a lack of recognition. And without recognition, recovery is impossible. The third sign is change in actions, not words. Not dramatic. Not perfect. But real. Not, I understand everything now. But, I'm doing things differently. If the same conversations repeat for years, while the behavior stays the same, this isn't a phase. It's a system. And it's important to be honest. You're not waiting for miracles. You're waiting for the smallest real movement toward you. The fourth sign is your ability to be yourself. Ask yourself directly, can you, next to this person, be tired, irritated, weak, inconvenient, without fearing rejection? If you're always collected, if you constantly monitor how you speak, if you filter your feelings, you're not in a relationship. You're in survival mode. And the final, most important sign, what happens inside you when you imagine the future. Not 5 years from now, just tomorrow. If the thought that everything will stay the same causes tightening inside, heaviness, aversion, that's a signal you can't ignore. But if alongside the pain, there's also a faint, almost imperceptible sense of hope, it means something alive is still there. One thing matters deeply. Hope is not a reason to endure. But pain alone is not a reason to run. A decision about divorce becomes mature only when you clearly see that you've done everything you could, not from fear, but from self-respect. And if, after that honest look, you realize there is nowhere left to go, leaving becomes not an escape, but a truthful choice. In the next final part, we'll talk about how to make this decision in a way that doesn't destroy you, neither by staying nor by leaving. At some point, silence arrives. Not the kind that scares you, but the kind where there is no more chaos. You're no longer torn between leave and stay. You stop replaying the same conversations in your head. You simply look at your life honestly. And it's exactly at this point that a real decision becomes possible. Not impulsive. Not born from pain. Not from exhaustion. But an adult one. There's one important thing to understand. A decision about divorce is not an answer to the question, do I feel good or bad right now? It's an answer to a different question. What kind of reality am I willing to live in going forward? And there is no universally right option here. Sometimes the mature decision is to leave. Sometimes the mature decision is to stay and change the dynamic. But in both cases, the decision stops being an escape. For this to happen, several inner steps are needed. The first step is separating hope from illusion. Hope is when you see real signs of movement. Illusion is when you cling to words, the past or potential that has never become reality over the years. When you look honestly at facts, not promises, breathing becomes easier, even if the truth is uncomfortable. The second step is reclaiming your agency. As long as all your energy goes into trying to change someone else, you're not living your own life. A mature decision begins with the question, what do I choose for myself, regardless of whether he changes or not? This is not an ultimatum. It's a boundary. The third step is accepting that any decision involves loss. If you leave, you lose a familiar reality, even if it was painful. If you stay, you lose the illusion that everything will change on its own. And it's the acceptance of loss that makes a decision honest. Without it, doubt always remains. The fourth step is letting go of the search for a perfect outcome. Real life has no painless decisions. There are only decisions after which pain becomes meaningful. When you stop looking for the right option, you start looking for your option. And that's where calm appears. Not joy, not excitement, but the feeling that you are no longer betraying yourself. And that is what matters most. If you leave not because you broke, but because you chose yourself. If you stay not out of fear, but with a clear understanding of what must change and how. At this point, there is no longer a need to prove anything to anyone. You stop seeking permission. You've already given it to yourself. Divorce is not always an ending. Sometimes it's the beginning of a new life. Sometimes it's the beginning of new relationships within the same one. But in any case, it should not be the result of exhaustion. It should be the result of clarity. If after this entire series, what you feel is not urgency, but calm composure, then you approach the decision the right way. Not quickly, not beautifully, but honestly.